What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Just One Man. This is episode 2, and this is Just One Man, the podcast that dives a little deeper into the Sunday school stories that you may have grown up hearing and takes a look at how we can apply them to our lives and really connects the dots and hopefully helps to deepen your faith just a little bit. This is also part 2 of creation, so we started with our very first episode, taking a look at the first 3 days of creation, just to give you a little reminder. So we started with day 1, where God created all matter, energy, light, and time in the universe. And then we shifted over to day 2 and took a look where God created our atmosphere and water. And then on day 3, we got land and plant life. And so today we are going to move into day 4. And day 4, we are going to take a look at what God filled with the creation of day 1, which was all things and the universe and time, etc. Now, I am no Bible scholar by any means. I'm just trying to share, I guess, what little bit of knowledge that I have. So I hope that you take something away from this. And if nothing else, that it just, helps to deepen your faith just a little bit. So let's move into day number 4, and that's Genesis chapter 1, verses 14 through 19. And it says, "Then God said, 'Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. Let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth.' And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, and the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening, and there was morning, the 4th day." So as we looked last week, expanse is just another word for surface of the heavens, and last week we also touched on that there are 3 different heavens. And so we have to wonder, well, which one are we talking about here? And since what's being created on day 4 is filling day 1, then we know that the heavens that are being referenced here is outer space. And it says that God created a greater and a lesser light. And notice that God does not name them. In this instance, he is trying to discourage idolatry, although we do learn later that the Israelites, as they tended to do, they did that anyway. Moses gives them some of the law in Deuteronomy 4:19 to back that up, that says, "Beware not to lift your eyes to heaven and see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the hosts of heaven, and be drawn away and worship them and serve them, those which the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven." So even Moses had given them in the law later not to look at the sun and the moon and to worship them or idolize them. And so it says, why were they made? To separate and govern the day and the night. So the physical dominion there. And then also with the movement of light and dark around the planet, we get winds, we get seasons. So before there was light and there was dark, so kind of just like those blinking lights. And so now it's there to govern the day and the night. So no more blinking lights. And then there's also like a 5-word sentence in here that is often overlooked or understated, and that is, he made the stars also. Like we get so caught up on day 4 talking about, like it's the sun and the moon, but it also says in there that he made the stars. And there are a few purposes for why God made all of these. And let's take a look at those. So the first is going to be for signs or omens or witness. And in Psalms, it says that, to bear witness to God's power and glory is one of the reasons why the sun, moon, and stars are made. It also gives us, a witness to God's character and nature, and that they are for signs of his coming judgment that we learn about in the book of Joel. God also made those 4 seasons. Both the sun and the moon produce seasons. In Psalms 104, it says he made the moon for seasons, and the sun knows the place of its setting. You appointed darkness, and it became night, in which all the beasts of the forest prowl about. And the sun, just the basic cycle of life. The sun produces energy. The moon, it has its monthly cycle that's used to mark religious observations in Israel. And both of them serve to remind the world of God's faithfulness to his plan of redemption. Sun, moon, and stars also are for days and years, counting time. So, we count a day because it takes the moon, 1 month to do a full rotation around the earth. And the sun we use to count the years as it takes, 1 year for it to make its rotation around the earth. Now, interesting enough, and we'll look at this much later when we take a look at the book of Revelation, but neither of these are in the new creation. We're not going to count years. Now, we will count months, but that's just because the tree of life is going to produce a new fruit each month, and that's for the purpose of a memorial to observe Christ's work, not because we'll secretly be keeping track of what the months are so that we know how many years have passed in eternity. So then we have to wonder, well, then why would we count them now? And you have to think of it as that we're not counting up, even though that's how our years progress, but we're actually counting down to something. We're counting down to the end of our age. We're counting down to the coming judgment that is going to happen in the prophecy that is the book of Revelation. So here we are, day 4. God has filled day 1 with the sun, moon, and stars. Obviously, he created those, but he fills day 1 with those. And that really defines our understanding of the entire universe with what God created on those 2 days. So now we move into day 5, and that is going to fill what was created on day 2. So picking up Genesis 1, verse 20, it says, Then God said, Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heaven. God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw it was good. God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. There was evening, there was morning, the 5th day. So if we remember on day 2, God created the atmosphere and the water. And so today on day 5, he fills it with the sea creatures and the birds. And we take note that this is the first day to feature any living creatures. A living being from the Hebrew, and again, I'm not a Bible scholar, so, if you are and you're listening to this, I apologize for just terribly ruining most of these words, is Che Nepsha, and that has unique qualities. And so the things that God tells them to do is to multiply, so to reproduce of their own kind. So the same as plants. And these living beings also possess blood. There's life in the blood, and there's a lot of spiritual truth in that as well. So that also means that they will experience death. Genesis chapter 9, verses 3 through 5, after the flood, God is talking to Noah and his family, and he says, Every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give it all to you as I gave the green plant. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. Surely I will require your blood life, or your lifeblood. From every beast I will require it, and from every man's brother, I will require the life of man. And so God establishes this new rule after the flood that anyone that should take a life with the blood in it should lose their life for doing so. And that's because, you think about, as we'll talk when we get to day 6, but, up until this point, man just ate, vegetables and fruits, but post-flood, all that vegetation would have been gone, so man was going to have something to eat, and so that's why God gives us meat to eat then. But I don't want to spoil the next day for when we get there. And so this blood is also used temporarily, animal blood is used temporarily to cover human sin. The priest would use it to, rub and sprinkle on the altar, and that made an atoning for what our sin was. And then, eventually, God used that later through his son. Even Jesus said in Matthew 26:28, he says, "For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for forgiveness of sins." And then John 19:34 said, "But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out." So really just like an emphasis on a special kind of life, like a life that can be lost, transferred spiritually speaking, and again, God intended to use that later through Jesus and his dying on the cross for us. So day 5, again, fills day 2 with the sea creatures and the birds, and he told them to multiply, meaning that God established some of them, but not all of them, which makes sense because if you think about it, like there's only a finite amount of fish that can fit in the sea, and birds in the air, unless there is what? Unless there is death. So God has set the standard for the environment. Again, God's already anticipating where creation is going with the downfall of man. So, he tells them to multiply because he knows that in the future death is going to be coming. And then we move into day number 6. Day number 6. So we're verse number 24. It says, "Then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle, creeping things, beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw it was good." So we also talked last week that phrase, "God saw it was good," actually translates into God reflected upon it and saw it was beneficial. So let's look at some of the words here in these verses. So the word kind, as it's talking about these animals, so it's, the animal of some type within which there was the potential for diversification to a limit. So, like there weren't any crossing over of kinds, like they were all supposed to stay in their lane. Really just think about it like they all possess the DNA to diversify to a limit. And that word kind also comes back whenever we look at there were 2 of every kind of animal that got onto the ark. So it's really important to understand this in the creation story so that as that comes up later, as we look at things in the future, that we have a better understanding of that. And then also there's categories of animals that are listed. It lists cattle and creeping things and beasts. So the cattle, yes, it means cows, but it was also talking about like goat, sheep, dogs, cats, any animal that you would think about that you can domesticate. Not necessarily like hang out with you on your couch. But again, like this is supposed to be beneficial to mankind. So like they can be domesticated for the purpose of mankind. So to be able to farm, participate in agriculture, labor, food production, etc. And then the creeping things are, kind of just what you would think, like ants, caterpillars, ladybugs, butterflies, etc. And then beasts, think of those as like animals that you would not be able to domesticate, so like lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. You knew that was coming. So God declares that the day is good before completing the work of that day. Okay, he declares that it was beneficial, meaning that it was beneficial for a purpose. And everything in creation has been, quote, good or beneficial up to this point. And we wonder, like, but for what? And it's kind of like if you were to go and buy a hamster. Hopefully you're not just going to like go get the hamster and come home with it and then be like, oh man, like I forgot all of this stuff. Typically, like when you get any kind of animal, you prepare for it. So if you're going to get a hamster, you're going to get the cage, you're going to get like the little stuff that goes in the bottom of it. You're going to have a little food thing and a water thing. And like the last thing that you go to get is the hamster to then put in, all of the things that you have prepared for it. And so, yeah, I guess I'm kind of like comparing us to hamsters, but I guess there's worse things to be compared to.